The bell above the door chimed softly as Sarah Martinez stepped into Miller's Gun and Sporting Goods on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the glass display cases filled with hunting rifles, handguns, and ammunition. Behind the counter stood Tom Miller, a 60-year-old former police officer who had owned the shop for nearly 2 decades. Tom looked up from his paperwork, taking in the sight of the woman who had just entered. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, wearing a simple navy blue coat over dark jeans. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face showed the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleepless nights. What struck Tom most were her eyes. They darted nervously around the shop before finally settling on him. "Can I help you with something?" Tom asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention. In all his years running the shop, he had developed an instinct for reading customers. Some came in as collectors, others as hunters preparing for the season. A few were first-time buyers looking for home protection. But something about this woman felt different. Sarah cleared her throat and approached the counter slowly. "I need to buy a gun," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something for protection." Tom nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "All right, I can help you with that. What kind of situation are we talking about? Home defense, personal carry, or something else?" "Personal protection," Sarah replied, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. "I've never owned a gun before, but I need something reliable." "Have you had any firearms training?" Tom asked, pulling out a clipboard with the necessary federal forms. "Any experience shooting at all?" Sarah shook her head. "None. But I'm a quick learner." Tom studied her face carefully. In his experience, people who had never handled firearms and suddenly needed protection were usually running from something or someone. The nervous energy radiating from this woman confirmed his suspicions. "Well, we'll need to start with the basics then," Tom said, moving toward a display case containing several handguns. "For someone new to firearms, I usually recommend starting with something manageable. A revolver can be a good choice, simple mechanism, reliable, not too much recoil." As Tom unlocked the case and began explaining the differences between various models, Sarah's attention kept drifting to the front windows. Every few seconds, she would glance outside, watching for any sign of movement in the parking lot. "This here is a Smith & Wesson .38 Special," Tom continued, placing a stainless steel revolver on the counter. "Good for beginners. 5-round capacity, not too heavy, and the recoil is manageable for most people." Sarah reached out hesitantly to touch the weapon, then pulled her hand back as if it had burned her. "How much does something like this cost?" "This particular model runs about $400 plus tax. But there's more to consider than just the gun itself. You'll need ammunition, probably a holster if you plan to carry it, and I'd strongly recommend some training." "Training?" Sarah asked, finally making eye contact with Tom for more than a brief moment. "Absolutely," Tom replied firmly. "Owning a gun without proper training is dangerous for everyone involved. There's a range about 20 minutes from here that offers basic firearms courses. I know the instructor personally. Good man. Very thorough." Sarah bit her lower lip. "Considering this information, how long would that take? The training, I mean." "Basic course is usually a weekend. 2 days, covers safety, handling, basic marksmanship, legal considerations. But honestly, you seem like you might be in a hurry for some reason. Is everything okay?" The directness of Tom's question caught Sarah off guard. She looked down at the revolver on the counter, then back up at Tom's concerned face. Something about his demeanor, calm, patient, genuinely caring, made her feel like she could trust him. "I'm in a difficult situation," she admitted quietly. "My ex-husband has been making threats. The police say they can't do much until he actually does something, but I'm scared." Tom nodded slowly. "I see. How long has this been going on?" 3 months, Sarah replied, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. "We divorced 8 months ago, and at first he seemed to accept it, but then he started showing up at my work, following me home, leaving messages. Last week he told me that if he couldn't have me, nobody could." "Have you documented these incidents? Kept records of the threats?" "I have copies of text messages, voicemails, even some photos I took when I spotted his car parked outside my apartment. But the detective I spoke with said it's not enough for a restraining order that would actually stick." Tom had heard similar stories before. The legal system often left people in vulnerable positions, waiting for something terrible to happen before meaningful action could be taken. He understood why this woman felt the need to take her protection into her own hands. "I have to ask you this, and I need you to be completely honest," Tom said, leaning slightly forward. "Are you buying this gun to protect yourself, or are you planning to use it to confront your ex-husband?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I want to protect myself. I'm not looking for trouble, but I can't keep living in fear. Yesterday, he left a note on my car windshield that said he knew my daily routine. I barely slept last night." Tom believed her. The fear in her voice was genuine, and her body language suggested someone who was desperate for security rather than seeking revenge. "All right," Tom said. "Let's talk about your options. But first, I need you to understand something important. A gun is not a magic solution. If you're going to carry one for protection, you need to be absolutely prepared to use it, and you need to understand the legal and emotional consequences of that decision." Sarah nodded. "I understand. I've been thinking about this for weeks. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I won't let him hurt me either." "Fair enough," Tom replied. "Now, in terms of what would work best for your situation, I'm thinking a concealed carry option might be more practical than a full-size home defense weapon, something you can have with you when you're out and about." He moved to another display case and retrieved a smaller handgun. This is a Glock 26 compact pistol, holds 10 rounds plus 1 in the chamber. More firepower than the revolver, but also more complex to operate. The trigger is consistent every time, and it's known for reliability. Sarah studied the weapon carefully. It looked more intimidating than the revolver, more serious somehow. "Which one do you think I should choose?" "That depends on how quickly you can get training," Tom replied. "The revolver is simpler. Point and pull the trigger, but it only gives you 5 shots. The Glock requires you to understand things like loading magazines, racking the slide, and proper grip technique. But it's got more capacity and faster reloads if you learn how to do it right." As they continued discussing the technical aspects of different firearms, Tom noticed that Sarah was becoming more focused and less nervous. Having something concrete to think about seemed to be helping her anxiety. "There's another thing we need to discuss," Tom said after explaining the basic operation of both weapons. "The background check process. Federal law requires a background check for all gun purchases. It usually takes a few minutes, but sometimes there can be delays." "What kind of delays?" Sarah asked, her nervousness returning. "Nothing to worry about in most cases. Sometimes the system is just busy, or there might be someone with a similar name who has a record. But based on what you've told me about your situation, I'm guessing you have a clean background."
"I do."
"I work in accounting, never even had a speeding ticket." Tom smiled slightly. "Then it should go smoothly. We'll run the check, and assuming everything comes back clean, you can take your purchase home today." "Today?" Sarah seemed surprised. "I thought there was a waiting period." "Not in this state for handguns. Rifles and shotguns require a 3-day wait, but handguns can be purchased immediately once the background check clears." This information seemed to provide Sarah with some relief. The idea of leaving the store still vulnerable, still defenseless, had been weighing on her mind. "Before we proceed," Tom continued, "I want to give you some information about a few other resources that might help your situation. There's a women's shelter downtown that offers security planning services. They can help you assess your home security, plan safe routes to and from work, and connect you with legal advocates who specialize in domestic violence cases." Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm not a victim. I'm not hiding in a shelter. I just want the means to protect myself if I need to." Tom raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I didn't mean to imply you were a victim. I just think it's smart to have multiple layers of protection. A gun is one tool, but it's not the only one." "You're right," Sarah said, her tone softening. "I'm sorry. This whole situation has me on edge. I keep feeling like I have to prove I'm not weak or helpless." "You walked into a gun shop to learn how to protect yourself," Tom pointed out. "That doesn't sound weak or helpless to me. It sounds like someone who's taking control of their situation." This observation seemed to resonate with Sarah. For the first time since entering the shop, she smiled. Just a small one, but genuine. "So what do you recommend?" she asked. "The revolver or the pistol?" Tom considered the question carefully. Given that you're dealing with a specific threat and might need the gun relatively soon, I'd say the revolver. It's simpler to learn and use under stress. You can get comfortable with it faster. If you decide later that you want something with more capacity, you can always come back. That makes sense, Sarah agreed. The Smith & Wesson you showed me earlier? That's my recommendation. Reliable, proven design, good for a beginner, and I'll throw in a basic holster and 50 rounds of practice ammunition. As Tom began preparing the paperwork for the sale, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She was finally taking concrete action to protect herself, but the weight of that decision was settling on her shoulders. "One more thing," Tom said as he filled out the federal forms. "I know I mentioned the training course earlier, but I want to emphasize how important it is. Having a gun you don't know how to use properly is more dangerous than having no gun at all." "I understand. Can you give me the contact information for that instructor you mentioned?" "Absolutely. His name is Mike Rodriguez. Former military, teaches basic handgun courses every Saturday. I'll give you his number." As Tom continued with the paperwork, the front door chimed again. Both he and Sarah looked up to see a police officer entering the shop. Sarah's face went pale, and Tom noticed her hands beginning to shake slightly. "Afternoon, Officer Jenkins," Tom called out, recognizing the uniformed man. "What brings you by today?" "Hey, Tom." The officer replied casually. "Just stopped in to pick up those targets I ordered last week." Sarah watched the interaction nervously, wondering if somehow her ex-husband had discovered her plans and alerted the police. But Officer Jenkins seemed completely unaware of her presence, focused entirely on his conversation with Tom. After a few minutes of casual conversation about departmental news and upcoming training exercises, Officer Jenkins collected his targets and left. Sarah exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. "You okay?" Tom asked, noticing her reaction. "Yeah, just jumpy, I guess. For a second there I thought, never mind, it's nothing." Tom studied her face, recognizing the signs of someone living under constant stress. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" She nodded hesitantly. "When was the last time you felt truly safe? Not just physically safe, but really relaxed and at peace?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She thought about it for a long moment, realizing that she couldn't remember the last time she had felt that way. Even during her marriage, there had been underlying tension and control issues that kept her on edge. "I honestly can't remember," she admitted quietly. "Well," Tom said, returning to the paperwork. "Hopefully, this will be a step in the right direction, but remember, real safety comes from more than just having a weapon. It comes from having a plan, knowing your options, and having people you can trust to help you." As Tom completed the federal forms and prepared to run the background check, Sarah found herself grateful for his approach. He wasn't just selling her a gun, he was treating her situation with the seriousness and respect it deserved. For the first time in months, she felt like someone was genuinely trying to help her, rather than dismissing her concerns or making her feel foolish for being afraid. The background check process would take a few minutes, giving Sarah time to think about what came next. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her sense of security, but she knew there would be much more to learn and many more decisions to make. Looking down at the revolver that would soon be hers, she felt a mixture of empowerment and responsibility settling over her like a heavy but necessary coat. The computer screen glowed softly as Tom entered Sarah's information into the federal background check system. The process typically took only a few minutes, but those minutes often felt like hours to anxious customers. Sarah stood at the counter, fidgeting with her car keys and occasionally glancing toward the window. "The system's running a bit slow today," Tom mentioned casually, trying to ease her obvious tension. "Sometimes Tuesday mornings are busy because of weekend sales catching up." Sarah nodded, but her attention was clearly divided. Every few seconds, she would look toward the parking lot, scanning for any sign of a familiar vehicle. The hypervigilance that had become her constant companion over the past few months was exhausting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was always being watched. "While we wait," Tom said, pulling out a laminated sheet from under the counter, "let me show you some basic safety rules. Even though you'll get proper training soon, there are some fundamentals you should know right away." He placed the sheet in front of Sarah. It contained 4 simple rules printed in large, clear text. Always treat every firearm as if it's loaded. Never point the gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. Be sure of your target and what's beyond it. These aren't suggestions, Tom explained. They're absolute requirements. Follow these 4 rules religiously, and you'll never have an accidental shooting. Break even one of them, and people can get hurt or killed. Sarah studied the rules carefully, committing them to memory. It seems so serious when you put it like that. Because it is serious, Tom replied. A firearm is probably the most serious responsibility you'll ever take on. It's a tool that can save your life, but it can also end lives, including your own if you're not careful. The computer chimed softly, indicating the background check was complete. Tom turned to read the results, then looked back at Sarah with a slight smile. Good news! Everything came back clear. You're approved for the purchase. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with nervousness. This was really happening. In a few more minutes, she would be walking out of this store with a weapon, capable of stopping the man who had been terrorizing her. Now, Tom continued, before I can legally transfer this firearm to you, I need to go over some important information about storage, transportation, and legal responsibilities. He pulled out another form and began explaining the state laws regarding concealed carry, storage requirements, and the legal use of deadly force for self-defense. Sarah listened intently, asking questions when something wasn't clear. The most important thing to understand, Tom emphasized, is that you can only use deadly force when you reasonably believe your life is in immediate danger. The threat has to be imminent, and you have to believe that using the gun is the only way to prevent death or serious bodily harm. What if he just threatens me? Sarah asked. What if he says he's going to hurt me but doesn't actually have a weapon? That's where things get complicated, Tom admitted. The law varies from state to state, and every situation is different. That's another reason why training is so important. A good instructor will cover the legal aspects in detail and help you understand when you can and can't use your weapon. As Tom completed the paperwork, Sarah found herself thinking about the weight of the decision she was making. Up until a few months ago, her biggest worry had been meeting quarterly budget deadlines at the accounting firm where she worked. Now she was preparing to potentially take another person's life to save her own. Tom, she said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Have you ever had to use a gun to protect yourself? Tom paused his writing and looked up at her. Once. About 15 years ago, when I was still on the force. Domestic violence call that went bad. The guy came at me with a knife after he'd already stabbed his wife. What was it like? Tom was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking about how to answer. Terrifying and necessary at the same time. Even with all my training, even knowing I was in the right, it changed me. It's not something you ever really get over, but sometimes it's the only choice you have. Sarah nodded slowly. I keep hoping it won't come to that. Maybe just having the gun will be enough. Maybe knowing I'm not completely helpless anymore will give me the confidence to handle things differently. That's possible, Tom agreed. Sometimes just having the option changes how you carry yourself, how you respond to threats, but you have to be prepared for the possibility that your ex-husband won't be deterred by anything short of actual force. The brutal honesty of that statement hit Sarah hard, but she knew Tom was right. Her ex-husband, Marcus, had always been a man who took what he wanted through intimidation and control. The divorce had stripped away his legal control over her life, but he clearly wasn't ready to accept that loss. Tell me about him, Tom said, continuing to fill out forms. Your ex-husband. What kind of man are we dealing with? Sarah considered how to describe Marcus to someone who had never met him. He's charming, I guess you'd say. Successful businessman, well-dressed, knows how to talk to people. But underneath all that, he's got this need to control everything around him. When I first met him, I thought his attention and protectiveness were romantic. I didn't realize they were warning signs. How big is he? Physical conditioning? 6'2". Maybe 190 pounds. He works out regularly. Played college football. He's not huge, but he's strong, and he knows it. Tom nodded, making mental notes. Has he ever been physically violent with you? Not directly, Sarah replied carefully. He never hit me, but he would do things like grab my wrist too hard when he was making a point, or stand too close when he was angry, using his size to intimidate me. Looking back, I realize he was always just on the edge of crossing that line. And since the divorce, the threats have gotten more explicit. He told me last week that he's been thinking about what it would be like to teach me a lesson about respecting my husband. The way he said it, Sarah shivered slightly. I knew he wasn't talking about having a conversation. Tom finished the paperwork and set his pen down. Sarah, I want you to understand something. Based on what you've told me, you're dealing with someone who sees you as property he's lost, not as a person with rights. Men like that can be extremely dangerous because they feel entitled to get back what they think belongs to them. I know, Sarah said quietly. That's why I'm here. Tom reached under the counter and pulled out a small lockbox. This comes with the gun, he explained. If you're going to keep it at home, you need secure storage when you're not carrying it. Even if you live alone, it's a good habit to develop. He then retrieved the Smith & Wesson revolver they had discussed earlier, along with a simple leather holster and a box of ammunition. The weight of the gun surprised Sarah when Tom placed it in her hands for the first time. It's heavier than I expected, she commented. That's actually a good thing for a beginner, Tom explained. The weight helps absorb recoil and makes the gun more stable when you're aiming. Here, let me show you the basics. Tom guided Sarah through the fundamental operations of the revolver, how to open the cylinder, load and unload cartridges, and check to ensure the weapon was safe. Sarah proved to be an attentive student, asking relevant questions and demonstrating good retention of the information. The most important thing to remember, Tom emphasized as he showed her how to safely handle the weapon, is that this is always loaded, even when you know it's not. That mindset will keep you safe. As Sarah practiced the basic handling techniques, Tom noticed that her confidence was growing. The nervous energy that had characterized her behavior when she first entered the shop was giving way to focused concentration. You're doing well, Tom observed. You have good instincts about handling the weapon safely. It helps to have something to focus on besides my fear, Sarah admitted. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm doing something constructive instead of just reacting to what Marcus might do next. Tom completed the final paperwork and slid it across the counter for Sarah's signature. As she signed her name, he studied her face, noting the determination that had replaced some of the fear he'd seen earlier. One more thing before you go, Tom said. I want to give you my card with my personal cell phone number on it. If you ever have questions about the gun, or if your situation escalates and you need advice, don't hesitate to call. Sarah looked surprised. You do that for all your customers? No, Tom replied honestly. But I've got a daughter about your age, and I know what I'd want someone to do if she were in your situation. The gesture touched Sarah more than she had expected. For months, she had felt isolated and alone, convinced that no one really understood the danger she was facing. Tom's willingness to extend help beyond the business transaction made her feel less alone. Thank you, she said, taking the card and placing it carefully in her wallet. That means more to me than you know. As Tom packaged up her purchase, Sarah felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. There was relief at finally having a means of protection, but also apprehension about what carrying a weapon would mean for her daily life. She was crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. Sarah, Tom said as he handed her the bag containing her purchase, I need to ask you one more time. Are you sure about this? Once you walk out that door with this gun, your life changes. There's no going back to being someone who doesn't own a weapon. Sarah thought about the question seriously. She could still change her mind, could return the gun and walk away. But then she thought about Marcus's latest message, about the way he had looked at her the last time she'd seen him outside her workplace, about the sleepless nights and constant anxiety that had become her reality. I'm sure, she said firmly. I can't keep living the way I have been. If this is what it takes to get my life back, then this is what I have to do. Tom nodded, satisfied with her answer. Then I wish you the best of luck. Remember what I said about training. Call Mike Rodriguez as soon as possible. And if you need anything else, or if you just want someone to talk to who understands what you're going through, you have my number. Sarah picked up the bag and headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Tom, do you think this will work? Do you think having this gun will actually keep me safe? Tom considered his answer carefully. I think it gives you options you didn't have before. Whether that's enough depends on a lot of factors, some of which are out of your control. But I can tell you this, you're not the same woman who walked in here 45 minutes ago. You're stronger now, more prepared. That matters more than you might realize. As Sarah walked toward her car, she felt the weight of the bag in her hand and the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The 12 minutes she had spent in Miller's Gun and Sporting Goods had changed everything. She was no longer a helpless victim waiting for something terrible to happen. She was a woman with the means and hopefully soon the knowledge to protect herself. But even as she felt empowered by her decision, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she unlocked her car door, she glanced around the parking lot, searching for any sign of Marcus's silver sedan. The paranoia that had driven her to this point wasn't going to disappear just because she now owned a gun. If anything, the stakes had just gotten higher for both of them. Sarah sat in her car outside Miller's gun shop for several minutes before starting the engine, the bag containing her new revolver resting on the passenger seat beside her. The weight of what she had just purchased seemed to fill the entire vehicle, making the familiar interior of her Honda Civic feel strange and new. She had crossed a line today and there was no going back. Taking a deep breath, Sarah started the car and began the drive home to her apartment. Every few blocks she found herself checking the rearview mirror, a habit that had become second nature since Marcus's harassment began. Today, however, the vigilance felt different. She was no longer just watching for threats. She was watching as someone who could respond to them. The drive to her apartment complex took 20 minutes through moderate afternoon traffic. Sarah lived in Riverside Meadows, a middle-class development that offered decent security and reasonable rent for young professionals. When she and Marcus had divorced, she'd chosen the location specifically because it was across town from their former shared home and featured controlled access gates and security cameras. As Sarah pulled into her assigned parking space, she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked near the complex entrance, a dark blue sedan with tinted windows. Her heart rate immediately increased, and she studied the vehicle carefully, trying to determine if anyone was inside. After watching for several minutes without seeing any movement, she decided it was likely just a visitor or new resident. Sarah gathered her purchase and walked quickly to her ground-floor apartment, keys ready before she reached the door. Once inside, she engaged both the deadbolt and the chain lock, then moved to the window to check the parking lot again. The blue sedan was gone. Probably nothing, she told herself, but her hands were still shaking slightly as she set the bag on her kitchen table. Sarah's apartment was modest but comfortable, a one-bedroom unit with a small living area, galley kitchen, and single bathroom. She had furnished it simply after the divorce, choosing function over style as she rebuilt her life from scratch. The walls were mostly bare except for a few family photos and a diploma from the state university where she had earned her accounting degree. Sitting at her kitchen table, Sarah carefully removed the revolver from its box and set it on the wooden surface. In the familiar environment of her home, the weapon looked even more serious and intimidating than it had in the gun shop. This was really happening. She was now a gun owner. Following Tom's instructions, Sarah practiced the basic safety procedures he had taught her, checking to ensure the cylinder was empty, opening and closing the mechanism, and getting comfortable with the weight and feel of the weapon in her hands. The more she handled it, the less foreign it felt, though she was acutely aware of how much she still needed to learn. After about 30 minutes of practice, Sarah carefully placed the unloaded revolver in the lockbox Tom had provided and stored it in her bedroom closet. She then called the number Tom had given her for Mike Rodriguez, the firearms instructor. Rodriguez Tactical Training, a gravelly voice answered after 3 rings. Hello, my name is Sarah Martinez. Tom Miller at Miller's Gun Shop gave me your number. I just purchased my first handgun and need training. Ah, Tom sent you over. Good man. When are you looking to get started? As soon as possible. Sarah replied. This Saturday if you have an opening. I do, as a matter of fact. Had a cancellation this morning. Basic handgun course runs from 8 to 4. Covers safety, marksmanship, and legal considerations. Cost is $250, and that includes range fees and 50 rounds of practice ammo. You bring your weapon and another 50 rounds for additional practice. That sounds perfect. What do I need to do to register? After completing the registration process and receiving directions to the training facility, Sarah felt a sense of momentum building. She was taking concrete steps to regain control of her situation, and each action made her feel slightly more empowered. The rest of the week passed without incident. Though Sarah remained hyper-vigilant whenever she left her apartment, she saw no sign of Marcus, received no threatening messages, and began to wonder if perhaps her fears had been overblown. Maybe the divorce really had been enough to end his obsession with controlling her life. Saturday morning arrived gray and cloudy, with a light rain that made the drive to Rodriguez tactical training more challenging than Sarah had anticipated. The facility was located on the outskirts of town, occupying a converted warehouse surrounded by several acres of open land used for outdoor shooting ranges. Mike Rodriguez proved to be exactly what Tom had promised, a former Army sergeant with 23 years of military experience who had been teaching civilian firearms courses for over a decade. He was a stocky man in his early 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm authority that inspired confidence in his students. "Welcome to basic handgun training," Mike announced to the class of 8 students gathered in the facility's classroom area. "Over the next 8 hours, we're going to cover everything you need to know to safely and legally own and operate a handgun. Some of you are here for sport shooting, others for hunting, and some for personal protection. Regardless of your reasons, the fundamentals are the same." Sarah looked around at her fellow students. 3 middle-aged men who appeared to be recreational shooters, 2 women about her own age who seemed nervous but determined, 1 elderly gentleman who moved with the careful precision of someone with prior military experience, and a young man who looked like he might be purchasing his first gun for home defense. The morning session covered firearm safety, basic marksmanship principles, and the legal aspects of gun ownership. Mike's teaching style was thorough and patient, emphasizing safety above all else while ensuring that everyone understood the serious responsibilities that came with owning a weapon. "The most important thing to understand," Mike explained during the legal portion of the class, "is that owning a gun for self-defense means accepting the possibility that you might have to take someone's life to save your own or someone else's. That's not a decision anyone should take lightly, and it's not something you can undo once it's done." During a break between sessions, Mike approached Sarah privately. "Tom mentioned you're dealing with a stalking situation. Want to talk about it?" Sarah appreciated his directness and decided to be honest about her circumstances. She gave Mike a brief overview of Marcus's behavior and the escalating threats she had been receiving. "How long since you last heard from him?" Mike asked. "About a week now. It's been quiet, which is actually making me more nervous. He's never gone this long without some kind of contact." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "In my experience, guys like that don't usually just give up. He's either planning something or he's waiting for you to let your guard down. Either way, getting trained is the right choice." The afternoon session moved to the indoor range, where students would practice the marksmanship skills they had learned in the classroom. Sarah found herself both excited and nervous as she loaded her revolver for the first time with live ammunition. "Remember," Mike called out as the class prepared for their first shooting exercise, "everything we covered this morning about stance, grip, sight alignment, and trigger control. Start slow, focus on fundamentals, and don't worry about speed or trick shots. We're building a foundation here." Sarah's first few shots were scattered across the target, but Mike worked with her individually to correct her grip and stance. Within an hour, she was consistently hitting the center ring at 7 yards, and her confidence was growing with each successful shot. "You're a natural," Mike commented as they reviewed her target during a break. "Good hand-eye coordination, and you listen to instruction well. More importantly, you respect the weapon and understand the seriousness of what you're learning." As the day progressed, Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the challenge of marksmanship. There was something meditative about the focus required to align the sights, control her breathing, and squeeze the trigger smoothly. For a few hours, the constant anxiety that had become her companion faded into the background. "The key to defensive shooting," Mike explained during the final session, "is being able to perform under stress. Everything you've learned today gets harder when your adrenaline is pumping and you're genuinely afraid for your life. That's why practice is so important. You need these skills to become automatic." As the class concluded, Mike handed out certificates of completion and provided information about ongoing training opportunities. Sarah, I'd like you to come back in 2 weeks for our intermediate course. It covers shooting under stress, low-light scenarios, and some basic tactical movement. Given your situation, I think it would be valuable. Sarah agreed immediately, recognizing that the more she learned, the better prepared she would be if the worst happened. Driving home as the sun set behind gathering storm clouds, Sarah felt a complex mixture of accomplishment and apprehension. She was no longer the helpless woman who had walked into the gun shop a week ago. The revolver now resting in its holster beside her was no longer a foreign object, but a tool she understood and could use effectively. But even as her confidence grew, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being prepared for something inevitable. Marcus's silence over the past week felt ominous rather than reassuring, and she found herself wondering what he was planning during this quiet period. As she pulled into her apartment complex, Sarah noticed the same dark blue sedan from the previous week parked near the entrance again. This time, however, she could see a figure silhouetted in the driver's seat. Her training kicked in immediately. She noted the vehicle's position, observed the single occupant, and considered her options for getting to her apartment safely. Instead of parking in her usual spot, Sarah drove past the sedan toward the complex management office, which was still open and well lit. As she did, she got a clear look at the driver, a man with a baseball cap pulled low over his face, but definitely not Marcus. The car's license plate was partially obscured by mud, but she could make out enough numbers to remember. Sarah parked near the management office and sat in her car for several minutes, watching the sedan. The driver appeared to be watching the building entrances, though he quickly looked away when Sarah's vehicle passed. After about 10 minutes, the sedan started up and left the complex. Once she was sure the vehicle was gone, Sarah drove to her apartment and quickly got inside. She immediately called the non-emergency police number and reported the suspicious vehicle, providing the partial license plate number and description of the driver. "We'll have a patrol car swing by the complex a few times tonight," the dispatcher assured her. "If you see the vehicle again, call us immediately." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she placed her revolver in its lockbox on her nightstand instead of in the closet. The events of the day had given her confidence in her ability to protect herself, but they had also reinforced the reality that she might need to do exactly that. The quiet of the past week was ending, and Sarah had the distinct feeling that whatever Marcus was planning was about to begin. But now, at least, she was ready to fight back. The call came at 2:15 in the morning, jarring Sarah from a restless sleep. The phone's harsh ring cut through the darkness of her bedroom, and she immediately knew something was wrong. Normal calls didn't come at this hour. Sarah reached for her phone on the nightstand, her hand instinctively moving toward the lockbox containing her revolver. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. Heavy breathing filled the line, followed by a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. "Did you really think a gun would change anything, Sarah? Did you think I wouldn't find out, Marcus?" After more than a week of silence, he was back, and somehow he knew about her purchase at the gun shop. "Marcus, stop calling me. I've told you." "You told me nothing," he interrupted, his voice carrying a dangerous edge she had never heard before. "You ran away like a coward, hid behind lawyers and divorce papers, and now you think a piece of metal is going to protect you from me?" Sarah's mind raced as she tried to figure out how Marcus could know about the gun. Had someone told him? Had he been watching the gun shop? The dark blue sedan from the apartment complex suddenly took on a more sinister significance. "I know you've been having me followed," Sarah said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "The blue car at my apartment. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth or humor. "You always thought you were so smart, Sarah. Always thought you could outsmart me. But you have no idea what's coming." The line went dead, leaving Sarah sitting in darkness with her heart pounding. She immediately called 911, but knew from previous experience that the police response would be limited. Marcus hadn't made a specific threat, and phone harassment was difficult to prosecute without additional evidence. "Ma'am, we'll dispatch a patrol car to check the area around your apartment," the emergency dispatcher assured her. "If he calls back or if you see him in person, call us immediately." Sarah spent the rest of the night awake, sitting in her living room with her revolver loaded and within reach. Every sound from outside, a car door slamming, footsteps on the sidewalk, even the building's heating system cycling on, made her jump and peer through the window blinds. Morning came gray and drizzly, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared for another day of work. The accounting firm where she worked was located downtown in a secure office building, and she had felt relatively safe there, even during the worst of Marcus's harassment. Today, however, that sense of security felt fragile. Sarah called in sick to work knowing she was too rattled to concentrate on financial statements and budget reports. Instead, she spent the morning researching private security services and looking into the process for obtaining a restraining order, despite her previous attorney's warnings about the difficulty of enforcement. Around noon, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the number for Miller's gun shop. Sarah, this is Tom Miller. I wanted to check in and see how things were going with your new purchase. The concern in Tom's voice was evident, and Sarah found herself grateful for his follow-up call. Actually, Tom, things have gotten worse. Marcus called me in the middle of the night, and somehow he knows I bought a gun. That's concerning, Tom replied immediately. Any idea how he found out? I think he's been having me followed. There's been a suspicious car at my apartment complex, and Marcus mentioned the gun specifically during his call. Tom was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through the implications. Sarah, I think you need to consider that your ex-husband might be escalating toward a direct confrontation. Men like him often see a woman arming herself as the ultimate challenge to their control. What do you think I should do? First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Second, consider staying somewhere else for a few nights. A hotel, a friend's house, anywhere he wouldn't expect to find you. And third, make sure you have your weapon with you and that you're prepared to use it if necessary. After ending the call with Tom, Sarah made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. She packed a bag with several days' worth of clothes, secured her apartment, and checked into a hotel on the other side of town. She paid cash and registered under her maiden name, hoping to buy herself some time to figure out her next move. The hotel was a modest business-class establishment that catered to traveling professionals. Sarah's room on the 3rd floor had a view of the parking lot and 2 exits, which made her feel more secure than her ground-floor apartment. She spent the afternoon practicing with her revolver, dry-firing it repeatedly to build muscle memory and confidence. That evening, Sarah received another call from an unknown number. This time, she let it go to voicemail, and when she played back the message, Marcus's voice filled the hotel room with venom and threats that were more explicit than anything he had said before. You can run, Sarah, but you can't hide forever. I know where you work. I know where you live. I know your routines. And when I find you, not if, when, we're going to have a conversation about respect and what happens to wives who forget their place. The message was finally specific enough to constitute a clear threat, and Sarah immediately forwarded it to the police detective who had been handling her case. Detective Maria Santos called back within an hour. Sarah, this message is definitely enough for us to issue a warrant for his arrest on harassment and terroristic threatening charges. The problem is we have to find him first, and he's been smart about staying mobile. What does that mean for me? It means you need to be extra careful for the next few days while we track him down. You were smart to change locations. Stay where you are, vary your routines, and keep that gun close. This guy is clearly escalating. Sarah spent a sleepless second night at the hotel, jumping at every sound in the hallway and frequently checking the parking lot through her window. By morning, exhaustion was taking its toll on her nerves and judgment. Around 10 a.m., Sarah decided she needed to return to her apartment to pick up some additional items and check her mail. She knew it was risky, but she felt she couldn't hide indefinitely. Didn't know what she would discover after a 9/11, just was disgusted. She was about discovering deadlines when he saw the closeness of the match in San Francisco. Sarah parked near the entrance rather than in her usual spot, keeping the engine running as she quickly walked to her door. As she inserted her key into the lock, Sarah heard footsteps behind her on the concrete walkway. She turned to see Marcus approaching from the direction of the parking lot, walking with the confident stride of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said, stopping about 10 feet away from her door. "We need to talk." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She positioned herself with her back to the door, keeping distance between herself and Marcus, while her right hand moved toward the holster concealed beneath her jacket. "Stay back, Marcus. I've called the police and they're looking for you." "No, you haven't," Marcus replied calmly. "If you had called the police, they would have been here by now. You came here alone because you thought you could handle this yourself." Marcus was right, and his confidence in reading her actions was unsettling. Sarah realized she had made a mistake by coming to the apartment without backup, but it was too late to change that decision now. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her hand now resting on the grip of her revolver beneath her jacket. "I want my wife back," Marcus said, taking a step closer. "I want you to remember who you belong to and stop this ridiculous independence fantasy you've been living." "I'm not your wife anymore, Marcus. We're divorced. It's over." "It's over when I say it's over," Marcus snapped, his calm facade beginning to crack. "You don't get to decide that. You don't get to take half my money, half my property, and then walk away like I never mattered." Sarah could see the rage building behind Marcus's eyes, the same look she had learned to fear during the final months of their marriage. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the confrontation she had hoped would never come. "Marcus, you need to leave. Right now. If you don't, I'm going to defend myself." Marcus laughed and took another step forward. "With what? That little toy you bought at the gun shop? Do you really think you have what it takes to use it?" The mention of the gun shop confirmed Sarah's suspicion that Marcus had been having her followed, but there was no time to dwell on that revelation. Marcus was now less than 6 feet away and closing the distance with predatory focus. "I'm warning you," Sarah said, pulling the revolver from its holster and holding it pointed downward but visible. "Stop right there." Marcus paused when he saw the weapon, but his expression showed more curiosity than fear. "There it is," he said quietly. "The gun that's supposed to make you feel safe. Do you even know how to use that thing, Sarah? Have you ever actually shot anyone?" "Don't test me, Marcus." "I think I will," Marcus replied, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Because I think you're the same weak little girl you always were, and I think you'd rather die than actually pull that trigger." When Marcus's hand emerged from his pocket, it was holding a knife, a fixed-blade hunting knife with a 5-inch steel blade that gleamed in the morning sunlight. The casual way he held it suggested this wasn't an impulse decision but something he had planned carefully. "Now we're going to go inside your apartment," Marcus said, gesturing toward her door with the knife. "And we're going to discuss the terms of your return to our marriage. You can point that gun at me all you want, but we both know you don't have the backbone to use it." Sarah felt time slowing down as her training took over. Mike Rodriguez's voice echoed in her mind. "The key to defensive shooting is being able to perform under stress. Everything you've learned gets harder when your adrenaline is pumping, and you're genuinely afraid for your life." This was the moment Mike had prepared her for. Marcus was armed, threatening her with imminent violence, and clearly intended to force her into her apartment where anything could happen. Every legal standard for the use of deadly force was being met. "Marcus, put the knife down and walk away. This is your last warning." Instead of complying, Marcus raised the knife and took a large step towards Sarah. "I'm done warning you about anything. You're coming with me right now, or I'm going to..." Sarah raised the revolver to eye level, aligned the sights on Marcus's center of mass, and squeezed the trigger exactly as she had been taught. The gun bucked in her hands, the report echoing off the apartment buildings, and Marcus stumbled backward with a look of shock and disbelief on his face. "You actually shot me," Marcus said wonderingly, looking down at the spreading red stain on his white shirt. "You actually..." He took another halting step toward Sarah, the knife still in his hand, and Sarah fired a second shot. This time Marcus fell to the concrete walkway and didn't get back up. Sarah kept the gun trained on Marcus's motionless form as she used her free hand to call 911, her voice remarkably steady as she reported the shooting. Within minutes, the apartment complex was flooded with police cars and ambulances, and Sarah found herself surrounded by officers asking questions and paramedics checking her for injuries. Detective Santos arrived on scene 30 minutes later and took personal charge of the investigation. After reviewing the physical evidence, interviewing Sarah, and listening to the voicemail Marcus had left the previous night, she confirmed what Sarah already knew. This was a clear case of self-defense. "You did exactly what you had to do," Detective Santos told Sarah as they sat in the detective's unmarked car. "Based on his voicemails, his history of harassment, and the witness who saw him approach you with a knife, there's no question this was justified." As the crime scene technicians finished processing the area and Marcus's body was removed by the medical examiner's office, Sarah reflected on the 12 minutes that had changed everything. Her decision to walk into Miller's gun shop alone had set in motion a series of events that culminated in this moment. Tom Miller arrived on scene after hearing about the shooting on his police scanner, and he sat with Sarah as she gave her statement to the detectives. "You did everything right," he assured her. "You got training, you tried to de-escalate, you gave him every chance to walk away. Some men just won't listen to anything but force." 6 months later, Sarah stood before a mirror in the bathroom of her new apartment across town, getting ready for another day at the accounting firm where she had been promoted to senior associate. The nightmares had mostly stopped, though she still carried her revolver daily and would probably always be more aware of her surroundings than most people. The 12 minutes she had spent in Miller's gun shop had indeed changed everything, but not in the way she had originally expected. She had thought she was simply buying protection, but what she had really purchased was the power to take control of her own life. That power had come with a terrible cost, but it had been the only path available to her. As Sarah locked the door to her new apartment and headed out for another day of building her life on her own terms, she reflected on the lesson that those 12 minutes had taught her. Sometimes the most important decisions we make happen in the smallest moments, and sometimes saving your own life requires more courage than anyone should have to find. But when that moment comes, the only choice is to find that courage or lose everything that matters. Sarah had made her choice, and despite everything it had cost her, she knew it had been the right one.